Hi, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to do a special painting for all of my viewers who are using my image hose brushes. And if you don't have those and you're interested in downloading them, you can go to my website. I'll put a link here in the video, and you'll be able to go and get those if you're interested in using them. What image hose brushes are essentially are just kind of repeating stamps or repeating patterns that you can make. So you can paint a bunch of different individual art elements, and then you can use one of these brushes to kind of spit them out. So for instance, I've got this clouds brush that I made here that makes clouds. Again, these are all custom made brushes that if you want, you can download them from my website. So for all the people who have already downloaded the brushes, this video is something that you can watch that we can paint along together, and I'll show you how you can use some of these brushes. So if you've watched my videos before, you know that I like to paint from my imagination sometimes, especially when doing landscapes. So we're going to do that here. I don't know exactly what I'm going to paint yet. I'm just going to use some of these brushes and we'll just have fun. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to use the paint bucket to fill the background with a solid color. If you're having trouble with the paint bucket, make sure your fill up here is set to current color, because it might be set to source image, and if that's the case, then you're going to get some unexpected results. We're going to shift our hue towards blue, somewhere between cyan and this indigo color, so kind of in the middle. And then we'll pick kind of a bright color here for our sky, and we'll do a test and see if we like it. And I think I like that color, so I'm going to stick with that. And then we'll use the digital airbrush tool. And again, if you you can download my workspace for free. Even if you don't want to use these brushes, you can still get my free workspace that has all of these brushes here, so you can follow along with all my videos. So my digital airbrush here works really good for painting in skies, and we use a pretty big brush. And we want to use firm pressure at the top and then lighter pressure as we go towards the bottom, because that'll make a nice gradient going down. And we'll hold Alt on our keyboard and tap with our pen down here and click to sample our lighter sky color. Then we'll lighten it a little bit. And we'll shift it towards cyan just a little bit. That'll help lighten it. And we'll do the same thing. We'll throw in some lighter color at the base. So it's going to kind of make it look a little more realistic. And then we will select a little bit of a cream yellow color like this, and we'll put some of that in. So this is going to be right around where our horizon will be, right along where this white starts to kind of fade in. And let's blend our sky a little bit. A really quick way to just blend your whole sky, if you just want to do just a basic blend, is to go to Focus under the Effects menu, and then go to Soften. And you can kind of pan around to see, try to find a place. This will get rid of the graininess that the airbrush is leaving. And sometimes circular works better too. So we'll just leave this at 3. We'll click OK, and that softens any of that graininess that was in our background. Now let's use the coarse oily blender a little bit. It's a pretty big brush size, and toggle open our papers panel by double clicking on it here. And let's turn our paper scale and our paper contrast up, and we'll do a test and see. If you're getting texture like this, paper texture, that's a good thing. So where we'll be blending is kind of in the middle here. We want to blend horizontally, don't blend vertically like this as much, because we're not really quite ready to mix the sky up that way. But this will make some kind of subtle stuff in the background that'll look pretty good. Just extra detail, just a little bit here and there. And then we'll go through and we'll close this papers panel just to get it out of the way, and use the diffuse blur brush. I'm using kind of light pressure and circular winding strokes just to kind of blend it a little bit. I don't want to overblend it. I'll show you what overblending would be right here. This is overblending. See how everything that I just put in, all those details have gone away because I've pressed too hard I'm going to do an undo. So you don't want to underblend and you don't want to overblend. But something like that works. Now the sky's got a little more character. Now let's start using these brushes that we were talking about. So let's make a new layer. And if you want to, you can call it clouds. And we'll select the clouds brush here in our nozzle libraries. And most of these have suggestions as to which brush you should use, and the 3 most commonly used brushes that I use are all located here. So we'll use the linear size P. You can hover over it to see which one it is. And you can use just about any brush size you want, but what's important for painting clouds, whether you're using this brush or any other brush, is perspective. So when clouds are closer to you and they're above your head, they're going to be bigger and they're going to be broader. When they're further away and they're off in the distance, they're going to get flatter and thinner and kind of skinny like that most of the time. You know, this isn't always the case. There could be clouds that are far away that are still pretty big, pretty lofty, but generally speaking, clouds that are higher up in the atmosphere are generally kind of more clumpy looking, and then ones that are a little bit closer to the ground are generally kind of thinner and wispier. But you know, all that stuff can vary depending on the weather. But nevertheless, to maintain the perspective, you want what's closer to you in the foreground to be bigger and what's further away to be smaller. So in a perspective sense, we would have you know, our horizon somewhere around here, and then maybe this is our perspective point, and then everything comes out from these points at you. So what would be closer to you in this case would be up here as far as the clouds go, and then on the ground what's closer to you would be over here. So enough of that rambling there. I'll put in some really big, really broad cloud shapes, and I'm just kind of putting these in. I'm just being free with this. You know, this is the good thing about this brush, is you don't have to try too hard to make cloud shapes, and we will refine this a little bit too. And then we'll scale our brush down, and then the clouds that we're going to make in the middle here will be a little bit thinner and a bit smaller. And then when we get down towards the horizon here, we'll again keep making them a bit thinner each time. Now, some of these brushes work better when they're a certain size. This one kind of starts to break down a little bit into chunks, but that's okay because we'll blend all this stuff. So here's our horizon clouds. Just kind of throw in whatever. Maybe we won't go that far down. We'll go to about, maybe about there. Just throw in a few on the sides. I think that'll work. Now, sometimes you can play with, especially with this brush, you can change the blend mode. So if we change the blend mode to screen, I think that gives us some pretty good results, and it helps the clouds match the sky tone. And that might be the case if you had a different colored sky. This will help it blend in a little better. So let's do some blending now with the diffuse blur. These bottom ones are easy, so we'll do these. You can kind of just blend these up. You don't want to, like I mentioned with the sky earlier, you don't want to overblend it or it'll go away. And this is what overblending is. See, it just disappears. And then we'll use kind of light pressure here to blend these clouds in the middle. Just kind of hitting it with really light pressure. That way it doesn't destroy all of those dark speckled areas in the center, because we need all that stuff. We need that to be maintained for the cloud to look proper. But we do just want to kind of stir it up a little bit. This helps it to look, I don't know if stampy is a word, but because the tool kind of, this image hose brush kind of works like a repeating stamp, Sometimes some of these things can look like a repeating stamp pattern. So by blending it a little bit, you're removing that repetitive pattern, and then you're also kind of helping to make it look more like a cloud, and you're making it look more distant by blurring it. So I can kind of see some repeating patterns in here, and that's okay because in nature there are a lot of repeating patterns, but if I wanted to change that a little bit, I could go in here and just blend it a little more anywhere that I see that it needs that. But for the most part, the more random your clouds look, the better it's going to be. So now if we wanted to add some tinting to those clouds, which I would recommend doing, we'll right click on the clouds layer where it says clouds, and you can do that with one of the buttons on your pen if you have that enabled. That'll put a selection around the clouds. If we make a new layer here, then that selection will move to that new layer. So when we paint, we'll be painting inside of this cloud shape, but the paint will go onto a new layer. It won't go onto the cloud layer. So that will help us, for one, modify that tinting, and also help us decide whether we want to keep it or not, because we can do it before and after, and if we don't like it, we can just get rid of it without having to repaint these clouds. We'll set the blend mode to multiply, and we'll pick a peach color, something like this, and then on our keyboard we'll do a Control-Shift-H, and that's going to hide the selection edges. The selection will still be there, you just won't be able to see those lines marching around. We'll use the digital airbrush for this, and again make sure you have this new layer selected so that we're painting on it, and you can just go through and you can tint these clouds now with this peach color, and it's going to make it look really nice and give your clouds some character. So one of the most important things about using these brushes is to modify the results that you get. If you just kind of leave it, it's just going to look too digital, and I guess that's not such a bad thing. If that's your style and you want your stuff to look more digital, there's nothing wrong with that. But in this case, my goal is to make digital art look like traditional art, or maybe a mix of both. It kind of depends on what I'm painting. Do a little bit of both sometimes. But I want to show you here how you can get some more painterly results. We're going to sample one of these darker gray colors within our cloud here, and we're going to tint the bottom edges of all these clouds. So this is a bottom edge, however this is not. This is a top edge, so you don't want to tint that. You only want to tint the bottom of each of these clouds. So you got to think of these clouds as three-dimensional forms. There might be some middle area in here that gets darker that I'll enhance, like so. Maybe over in here there's some. So it kind of makes the clouds look like they're overlapping. I'll put some of that in over here. This is all a bottom. So there's this underside, and you can see more of this underside on the clouds that are above you or closer to you, and then you see less of it on the clouds that are further away. So these ones in the distance, you almost don't even really need to put any shadow on the bottom. So I'm using less and less as I get further into the distance. And it also kind of depends on the shape of the cloud. There might be some clouds that are turned on their side, or kind of some areas are facing more towards you than others. And then maybe we'll use a little bit of shadow, but we'll sample using Alt on our keyboard this blue color, see how it looks to maybe put a little touch, something subtle that you can barely even see. Okay, let's throw in a little more tinting. Let's get some yellow this time, and in a couple spots just use a tiny bit, throw in a little bit of yellow. And we'll throw in some of the sky blue by sampling it also, but don't use too much of it. You gotta be careful if you use dark colors, because when it's set to a screen blend mode, black will make your or when it's set to multiply, white will make your tint disappear. Like so, if I use white, then I'm essentially erasing my tint. And then on a screen layer, black makes your screen layer disappear. So black essentially works like an eraser. So watch out for that. On our tint layer here, let's call it a tint layer too, just so we're all clear about what this layer is. Let's turn down the opacity of that layer a little bit until we're satisfied with the blend that we get. And this just kind of subdues our tinting. If we leave it at 100%, it's, you know, pretty dark. And if we take it down too far, we can't see it. So we want to just kind of play with this slider. This is one of those things you'd be surprised at how 5 or 10% of adjustment here makes a big difference. And there really is kind of a magic number. And maybe you have to go back and adjust this back and forth sometimes. That's why it's good to keep this as a separate layer. However, unfortunately, you can't do that forever. So you'll have to be decisive, and eventually we're going to have to just fuse all three of these layers together for convenience so that we can blend them all. So let's do that. Let's select the tint and the clouds and the... Actually, let's just do this. Let's go to Layers, Drop All. That'll be faster. So all of our layers are now on a single layer, and let's blend it a little bit more. Just a tiny bit more. This will kind of help blend together some of that tint with the underlying layer and help blend the clouds with the sky a little bit. I'm using pretty light pressure here. Also, I notice we need to deselect our selection. Oops, that's always easy to forget. It's still selected. And sometimes you notice that and sometimes you don't. But you'll learn pretty quick when you're trying to paint. You can't paint outside of this shape. So we need to do a Control D to deselect. It's an easy thing to forget, so watch out for it. So that was making it so we couldn't blend outside of those cloud shapes, which we need to do. So I do a lot of paintings too, and I still forget that. So, you know, if you forget that your selection's active, at least you know why it's happening, and then you can fix it. I mean, you're probably going to forget it a lot of the time. Same thing goes with the preserve transparency feature. Sometimes that's on or off, and I have to kind of watch myself. My students especially tend to forget a lot, so it's, you know, it's an easy thing to do. But you know, it's a mistake. It's common, and if you know how to fix it, it's not the end of the world. I'm going to use my coarse oily blender to blend my cloud a little bit here, just because I feel like it needs it. Then use the diffuse blur to blend it a little more. That's looking better. I do that a little more on some of these spots too. This diffuse, or this coarse oily blender works really nicely for clouds. I'm just kind of stirring up a few spots here and there. So I think that looks pretty good. Now if we want to make some of these clouds look closer and further away, we can sample our sky color here and use the digital airbrush to, with light pressure, just to kind of darken the top area a little bit. And then towards the bottom here, we can sample our light sky color and just kind of lighten some of these ones that are closer to the horizon here. And if you really wanted to get crazy with these clouds, you could go in more with this coarse oily blender and use a bigger brush size, and you could really, you know, stir some of them up if you wanted to also in a couple places and make them look really wild. And again, you gotta go through and blend it a little bit with the diffuse blur. But again, that's kind of a way to modify some of those brushes. Now let's put in some kind of horizon here, some kind of hills in the background. So the easiest way to get a straight horizon line is we'll make a new layer. We'll just call it Horiz, short for horizon. There's no sense in making really long, complicated names if you don't need to. And we'll pick blue-gray color. is something like this maybe. And we'll put our horizon right about here. We can always scoot it around if we need to. We use the paint bucket to fill this selection with that color. We'll do a Control D to deselect this selection, and then we can move to our layer adjuster tool here, click on it, and we can use the arrow keys on our keyboard to just nudge it down where we think it should be. I think I like it right about there. Now let's use the blur brush to just blur the edge of this a little bit so it's not so sharp, because if this is in the distance, we don't really want it to be too sharp. That'll work. And let's set the blend mode to multiply. And we'll use the airbrush. We'll sample our light color here towards the horizon. We'll turn on preserve transparency by clicking on this icon. And then we'll go through and we will lighten near the horizon just a little bit. Maybe not quite that much. Something a little more subtle like this. That'll kind of help it look a little more distant. Now let's put in some mountains or something. So let's do MTNS, that's just short for mountains. Turn off preserve transparency so that we can paint. And let's use the linear size P brush with the boulders. Okay, so these boulders are really fun to use. We will just go in and put in some mountain shape here. Don't cover up all your horizon, leave a little bit of it so that it'll look, you know, maybe like an ocean or some land in the distance. And you can vary the size of your brush here. What you'll notice is when you go up, it tends to make it look like you're looking at the bottom side of a rock, and when you go down, it looks like you're looking at the top side of it. So you'll have to keep that in mind when you're painting directionally with some of these brushes. You know, if you want it to look like there's a shadow, go up, and then if you want it to look like there's a bulge or something, paint down. You get different effects doing different things. I just kind of just throw it in and don't really worry too much about it, but you can have fun and you can kind of build this thing out like a real mountain would be. Again, you can see I can just kind of go between big and small and really make something that looks already pretty good. I don't really need to do too much to it. Okay, I can live with that. I could spend forever messing with this trying to get it right, but you know, can't do that here. So we've got our cliff or our rock or our mountain. I'm not really sure what it is yet and where it's going to be, but it's there. And let's blend it a little bit, and I like to use the coarse oily blender for that. And we can keep this same paper that we have here, same paper settings. And with the coarse oily blender selected, we can blend a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in here so you can see a little better what I'm doing. It's like with the clouds, we want to try to break up some of these repeating patterns. So you can see there's all these horizontal seams here, and after a while they kind of start to look too unnatural. So I'm using this brush here to kind of break some of them up, and I'm also kind of sculpting the rock into the shape that I want. Having the paper setting set like this is going to make it so that I'm blending with the paper texture, so that's just going to help the rock have more shape and form to it. You can see that does a pretty good job of making some craggly looking rock. So, you know, you get some good instant results here with the tool, but if you really want it to look like it has some character, you're going to have to blend it a little bit or modify it or tint it. We might tint this a little bit too to make it match the environment. Because I did a lot of this stuff in just kind of neutral lighting, because that's how I like to start, is with neutral lighting, and then I just tint things to match whatever's going on around it. I think that's a good way to work. So you can see that looks pretty dang good, if I do say so myself. If you wanted to modify some of these edges, you can use the Distorto tool and that was here in my blenders. You can pull up on some of these rocks or push them down, and I don't want to go too crazy with it because it'll start to look unnatural. This just kind of helps. See, these two lumps are very similar. They're actually the same, probably the same part of the same stamp. So we want to change one of them, or change both of them. It comes down to the right balance of symmetry and asymmetry sometimes. So if things are the same, that's good in general, but you also want them to be kind of different and have some individuality. So there we go. We've got a cliff thing. You know, maybe we're at the beach or something. Maybe this isn't even going to be a mountain, or maybe we're on top of a mountain. I'm not really sure yet. Again, I'm just kind of doing this from imagination. So let's do some tinting and some texture to this. We're going to right click on it, or use the button on your pen, do select layer content, hide the selection with Control-Shift-H, make a new layer to tint on. We'll call it tint, just to make it clear what it is. We'll set the blend mode to multiply. And let's try some of this sky color as the tint in the foreground here in a couple places. Maybe we'll decide that our light's going to be coming, maybe it's coming kind of straight down. So we'll do a little bit of shadows on the edges here, and then we'll leave the center pretty bright. Something like that. That gives it a little bit of character. It makes it not look so static anymore. And I'm not just arbitrarily placing this color. I'm kind of looking at the areas that are already kind of dark anyways and just enhancing them a little bit. So there we go. Let's add another layer, and we'll call it text. That's short for texture. We'll make that also a multiply blend mode. We'll use maybe a blue-gray, something like this. For this, let's use the custom sponge, and we'll just tap a few times over it. Now look, that adds some instant cracks too. Doesn't that look amazing? And if we want to add some highlights, let's make yet another layer. Call it HL, that's just short for highlights. We'll make that a screen blend mode. Let's use like a dark orange red. Let's see if that works. I'm gonna use the square chalk brush. Let's see what we get here. That might work. Let's make the paper scale a little bit lower. Turn the contrast up all the way. And we'll zoom in here. And you have to kind of be careful about where you put these. I'm using kind of varied pressure. Sometimes I'm really scrubbing and sometimes I'm not. I'm trying to deposit a little bit of highlights here and there and then do it really intense in some other places. But mostly you want these highlights to be on the side where your light's going to be. Oops, that didn't work too well with the bigger brush. I'll just stay smaller here. And there we go. We've got some different colored highlights here. Zoom out and see how it looks, and I think that's a little too intense, so I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit till it blends in a little better. That looks more appropriate. And let's throw in some gray also, kind of gray it down a little bit. Let's add in another layer, and we'll take a gray color like that. And we'll use the square chalk, and let's change our paper texture to simulated wood grain. Make sure your contrast and size are up. And then just here and there in a few places I'm going to add some little splotches of gray in the highlight areas. We're going to end up modifying this a little bit, so don't worry if it's just kind of patchy like this. And then we will use, we'll set the blend mode to screen, turn down the opacity a little bit. We use the custom sponge and we'll switch our color to black. And we'll tap to kind of break up that gray a little bit and just make it a subtle overlay. Probably can't even hardly see it now, but I think that helps change up the color a little bit and make it look a little more natural. And I think that's probably about all we'll do for this painting. We'll do a little bit more of a finishing touch on it by doing you can save it now at this point if you want. It's probably good to save more often than I've been doing. I don't tend to save in these videos, but if I was doing a painting that I cared about saving, I would be doing saves pretty often, and I would be doing multiple iterative saves. So I recommend that you do that too. And that you save before you do things like drop all, which we're going to do now, to just put everything on a single layer. And let's use our blur brush to blur some of the edges here of our rock. Just the edges, so the edges aren't so sharp, but you don't want to go too far in. And then especially down here, let's see if we still have a selection active. See, I did it again. Selection's still active. We need to do a deselect. And you know how I know that I still had it active? Because when I did this blending down here, the edge still remained sharp because I wasn't blending outside of it. So again, you got to watch out for that. I'm doing a poor example of that today, but it's an easy thing to forget because it's hidden. So do a Control D to deselect your selection. And now when we blend, it's blending that edge as I wanted it to. Much better. And then towards the bottom, I guess it's, could be a little more out of focus if you want it to be. You can decide you could make this rock projection really blurry and really sharp in some places. It's kind of up to you where you want to do it. Finally, we'll put a vignette over the whole thing. Make a multiply blend mode. We'll take a dark or a blue-gray here and towards the top, and maybe a little bit along the sides and along the bottom. Do something like this. Turn down the opacity a little bit. Zoom out and see what we think. I think that looks pretty good. So that gives you an idea of what you can do with just two of my image hose brushes. So I'll be making more of these videos using some of the other brushes, and you'll be able to get a feel for how they work and how you can make some really unique, original looking artwork quite easily using these brushes. And again, they're available on my website if you want to download them. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.